Hi there, my name's Caroline Bruce and I'm e-moderating this webinar today. This is the second in our series of webinars focusing on understanding your whole school EAL provision, in which we'll be introducing some newly designed forms to add to the self-evaluation toolkit introduced previously. And we'll be hearing from school-based practitioners about their experiences around developing their provision for multilingual learners. Before I tell you about them, I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the webinar. We're focusing on the toolkit of materials developed by the Bell Foundation. We'll take a quick look at the whole school evaluation forms that were introduced previously and the new ones, which Karen will introduce, and we'll explore why they will be so useful for schools. Like last time, we're lucky enough to be drawing on the expertise of some of our licensed practitioners. First, we have Zoe, you can see Zoe there, as well as being a Year 3 and 4 class teacher. Zoe Walsh is lead teacher for EAL and migrant learners at a small Bristol primary school in the heart of the city that has high mobility and where the majority of pupils use English as an additional language. Zoe is a doctoral research student at the University of West England, where she's writing her thesis on the pedagogy for new arrivals. So we're definitely in safe hands. Zoe belongs to the Bristol Schools of Sanctuary Steering Group and works with them to support schools to become places of sanctuary for refugee and asylum-seeking pupils. Zoe's a regular columnist for Naldic's Journal. And as I've mentioned already, we're really delighted that she's a Bell Foundation licensed practitioner through our Centre of Expertise with Cabot Learning Trust in Bristol. You're really welcome, Zoe. We'll also hear insights from Zakia Raymond, a teacher at Horton Park Primary School in Bradford. Zakia is also a Bell Foundation licensed practitioner, this time through Exceed Academy's Trust in Bradford. Unfortunately, Zakia couldn't be with us this evening. Ironically, he has parents' evening, but he was good enough to share some of his views, which we've woven into the session, and I'm sure you'll find those really useful. Let's make a start then. So we'll start with a quick recap of the first part of the webinar series on understanding your EAL provision. In part 1, we introduced the toolkit, the EAL provision whole school evaluation toolkit. This is something that the Foundation developed to support schools with reflecting on their current EAL provision, identifying areas of strength and need, and considering actions for improving the provision for multilingual learners who use English as an additional language. The process is a self-evaluation activity. It's developmental in nature and is highly collaborative, involving a range of school staff and stakeholders. If you missed part 1 and want to listen to a recording of the webinar, it's available on our website, and you can access that with the QR code that's on the screen there in front of you. So, the whole school evaluation toolkit, in its most essential form, includes the self-evaluation tool itself, guidance for how to facilitate the process, a template to use for recommended actions, or of course you can use your own school's template for this, and then finally resources to support the areas that you identify as needing to develop or improve. And all of the guidance and these tools are freely available on our website for you to download and use in whatever way best suits your context. So the toolkit, the main toolkit, you may remember that there are 8 dimensions of EAL provision that are included. And you can choose to focus on all 8 of those in the evaluation, or you can choose just a number of them, 2 or 3 of them, for example, if you know that those are areas that you need to develop. So those 8 dimensions are, first, inclusive vision, values, attitudes and behaviours. Inclusive governance and leadership for EAL, whole school languages policy, continuing professional development and learning for EAL, assessment and placement of multilingual pupils, curriculum, teaching and support, learning and achievement of multilingual pupils, And finally, involvement of multilingual pupils, parents and carers. And today, the forms we're introducing, you'll be able to see immediately how they directly align with those specific dimensions. And in the guidance that sits with each of the new forms, it identifies which of those dimensions this is relevant to. Fabulous. So just a quick reminder of what it actually the main tool looks like. So for each of the 8 dimensions, the evaluation tool provides a set of questions that prompt you to consider various aspects of EAL provision for that dimension. So for example, here, you can see dimension B, inclusive governance and leadership of EAL provision. And it asks, is there a named governor who leads on EAL? Is there a member of SLT with overall responsibility for EAL? Does the school have an EAL strategy or action plan in place, and so forth? And there's space to respond with any comments or evidence that supports the question. And there's a place there as well for you to provide a score. It's a drop down of 1 to 5. 1 being that the development need for that area has not yet been identified, and 5 being that that aspect has been fully developed. So if you had a governor in place and that they provide complete support and challenge to the school around EAL provision, then that would of course be a 5. Fabulous. So in today's webinar, part 2, we'll look at 4 additional and recently developed tools, which we can refer to as mini tools that can support you in gathering data to use as part of evidence in a whole school evaluation of EAL provision. Or they can, of course, be used discreetly at any time, whether you're conducting a whole school evaluation or not. So you might want to simply gain a better understanding of a specific area of EAL provision that you'd like to understand that in much greater detail. So the 4 tools address, first of all, you can see school environment, lesson observations that focus on language development, multilingual pupil voice, and multilingual pupil pursuit, or sometimes known as shadowing. So all of these mini tools are freely available in the same place on the website and included as part of the whole school evaluation toolkit. They're all edible, the forms editable. The forms are all editable. You can record the input digitally, but they can also be printed out so that you can use paper copies and handwrite on those if you prefer. The forms are new, they're brand new, they went on the website yesterday. And so we'd really welcome any feedback about both the content and the design features. So please do let us know what you think. Get in touch with us at the foundation and let us know any feedback. So you can see the screenshot from the website there. So why have we recently developed these? Well, the first thing is the same reason as we produce any resource or tool. We could see that there's a demand for them. And this was because of inquiries we've been receiving from schools and through conversations with our scaling partners indicating an increase in need for having tools to help evaluate or look at EAL provision, including where staff may still be developing their expertise in EAL. We also know there continues to be an increase in the numbers of multilingual learners using EAL in our schools across the country as multilingualism becomes the norm in our classrooms. Today, as you'll know, more than 1 in 5 pupils use English as an additional language. So there's an increased need for providing inclusive and equitable provision. And finally, very fortuitously, it's important to highlight the latest version of Ofsted's School Inspection Toolkit now includes a whole section specifically looking at learners who use English as an additional language. So the first webinar that we did when we introduced the main toolkit, the main documents, That was before the announcement around the Ofsted toolkit. We developed these forms and got this webinar in place, and Ofsted made their announcement. So it has been just really nice timing. And it's our hope then that the schools can use these tools as a way to demonstrate their inclusion of multilingual learners and their provision of EAL for those learners. And we thought it would be useful to briefly take a closer look at the Ofsted toolkit. So if you haven't already seen that, it is on page 20. I'll share the link shortly. There are numerous statements in Ofsted's updated version regarding EAL, but amongst those it states that inspectors will consider the extent to which teachers assess pupils' English language proficiency accurately and regularly, recognise that providing opportunities for pupils to talk with staff and peers during lessons is particularly important. Teachers help pupils articulate what they know and understand by scaffolding, modelling, extending and developing their ideas. And develop and extend pupils' language carefully and deliberately with plenty of repetition. So these updates show that there's a government recognised need for specific approaches to supporting learners who use English as an additional language to allow them to progress and thrive in school. State-funded schools will be assessed on these points during inspections, so it's important to consider how to make and demonstrate progress in these areas. And that's why we're really hoping that these tools will be particularly useful for schools in doing so. So again, these 3 points are just a selection of the key points made in the document, and we really advise you to get a fuller picture by looking at page 20 yourselves. Now, another addition to the framework, as you've probably heard in the media, is the introduction of case sampling. And this process involves Ofsted taking a closer look at a group of pupils who have specific needs or face particular barriers to learning and or well-being. Now, we know that this will be based on the context of the school. So if it's a school with high numbers of learners using English as an additional language, or high numbers of learners who are new to English, then that group is likely to be a group that will be explored in greater detail. So inspectors will explore these pupils' experiences, how your school supports them and the progress they're making from their individual starting points. And while we won't go into all the details of case sampling here, it's worth noting that inspectors may review multilingual pupils' work. They may observe their lessons or activities, and where appropriate, may speak directly with the pupils or even their parents. In such cases, you'll need to consider any reasonable adjustments that might be required, for example, providing a translator or translation tool for pupils or parents who need one. So, how does this connect to the resources and the tools we're introducing today? The Foundation's primary goal is, of course, to help schools give multilingual learners the best possible learning opportunities. But at the same time, we recognise that Ofsted inspections are a key consideration for schools and that many need support in both delivering high quality EAL provision and evidencing their efforts. And that's why our second goal for these resources is to help you do exactly that. So, who are these tools for? The tools can be used by and are valuable for all school staff, from SLT to teachers, TAs to pastoral staff, and of course, EAL coordinators. So staff who are involved in conducting a whole school evaluation will find them particularly useful as a means for gathering data. And of course, as we just mentioned, school leaders will find them useful as a way to show progress in provision for supporting learners who use English as an additional language. And so we'll take a closer look at those forms now, and I'll hand over to Karen. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Caroline. Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to you all. Right, let's continue with to look briefly at how these tools are organised. And each tool includes a set of guidance on the website and a proforma that is designed to be used during the actual activity. So you've got your guidance with all the information you need on how to use the different proformas. So for example, there's an observation form to complete during, for example, an activity around pupil pursuit, as Caroline said, shadowing or also known as shadowing a learner, in this case, a multilingual learner. Or there's a checklist to refer to as you evaluate your school environment. So we'll take some time to look at these proformas in particular in turn. So looking at the guidance, first of all, for each tool, there's a description of what it is, then why it's important, how it connects to the whole school evaluation, and how it works. So what to do before, during, and after the activity, and you know, and as you process the information you've gathered, you can consider what next steps you might want to take based on what you've learned. So it's you know, an easily accessible document and sort of makes sense when you look at it. So all the guidance follows the same format. So going forward, we'll look at the first two tools, which will be inclusive school environment, and then we'll look at lesson observations. So we'll look at inclusive first of all. And after I've gone sort of navigated you through the forms, the proformas, I'm going to invite Zoe to join us and to share her expertise and insights on the importance of each of these areas and what she does in her school to address these areas from the ground. And as Caroline said a little bit later on, when we look at pupil voice and pupil pursuit, after I've sort of navigated you around the forms, I'll go through what Zakia offered in his work with multilingual learners and families. So that's kind of the process for this next session. Okay. So thinking about inclusive school environments as part of the evaluation process. So we know the diversity in our schools is constantly changing. As Caroline has said, over 1 in 5 learners are now recorded as multilingual learners in our schools. So first impressions are really important. So what is the first thing families, any family in fact, observe when they arrive at school? What is the physical environment like? How is it speaking to them? And this isn't just in terms of general maintenance of a school building, externally or internally, but looking to see if the school environment is looking to speaks to families and they're, you know, they can, and it speaks to them and they are visibly represented in the school, and they can see what the community of the school is. And it's a way of you know, really demonstrating how inclusive and welcoming you are as a school, to ensure that there's a sense of belonging and value to one's identity and for everyone. So the proformas. So the school environment, inclusive school environment proforma is a checklist of questions in different categories, and under each category there's questions under each category to guide you in this process. Again, as Caroline said, you don't have to be not all the questions can be addressed. If you're in the evaluation process, you know, make decisions about what you want to focus on and what you want to look at. But what they will do, these questions, is enable you to go much deeper into reviewing and gathering evidence on how, say, inclusive and welcoming and supporting the school environment is. So the questions allow this review to go, as I say, beyond the physical environment, to explore, the people who make up the school and the learners and their families. So, for example, there's multilingual learners, there's that category there, and the questions underneath there help to guide you in how families are multilingual learners or their families are involved. And there's a box at the side there, a space for you to add your own comments in, as Caroline said, digitally or pen and paper, whichever you prefer. Okay, so let's look at a couple of quick examples, going back to multilingual learners. And the question underneath that category is, are multilingual learners visibly involved in all aspects of school life? For example, are they taking on roles and responsibilities? Are they involved in extracurricular activities? And so forth. And then next, we have multilingual families, and there are a number of relevant questions to observe and notice how representative the families are and how that's represented in the school environment. So, for example, do you see multilingual learners or their families, if they are represented in school governance, for example, on the identity boards, the photographs of who's who in the school, etc. Are multilingual learners in school team photographs? Are they shown as representatives or ambassadors of different school clubs, that kind of thing? And the same with their families. Is it, are they visibly represented on different school bodies? Okay, so it's now my absolute great pleasure to invite Zoe to join me to talk about her expertise, as I said, on the importance of inclusive environments and what her school do to embrace this. So welcome, Zoe. Thanks ever so much for joining us at this busy time. So here's the first question. How can a school's physical and linguistic environment influence how pupils feel about belonging, identity, and participation? Tell us what you've done in your school and how you've embraced this inclusiveness in your environment.
Okay, so I think the first thing to say that the school's physical and linguistic environment is really a strong way of messaging, sending out messages to anybody that comes into your school, looks at what's going on around them and listens to what they can hear around them. I think that the environment, physical and linguistic, states more about the school's ethos and values than any kind of written policy ever can. It's a really honest reflection of what's going on in your school for your multilingual learners. What children and young people see and hear around them tells them who belongs in the school and where they fit in and how they can participate. And if the children and their families see images of people around them, see images around them of people that are like them, or they just see that there is diversity represented, then they'll know that this is a place of diversity and this is a place where diversity is celebrated. If children see and hear languages other than English, they're more likely to think that there's a place for their languages too, or at least that multilingualism is valued. So in terms of belonging, I think that belonging we can influence how children feel they belong in terms of the number of different groups that are represented in your environment. And I think that it's really important that you remember that it's nuanced and that we shouldn't generalize, and that that maybe not all of your Kurdish children speak Sorani, so make sure that you represent the other languages that Kurdish children, or that some children from India might be Christian. It's about the nuance within, because you could be missing out a whole bunch of children by making generalizations. Another really important one is the identity. I think the development of children's identities, particularly when they first arrive, but throughout their school journey, it's something that fluctuates. Many of our migrant pupils are navigating multiple identities as they arrive in the UK, and as they begin to settle, they know that they may move on. They may know that they may move back. So it's really important that you give children the opportunity to consider that for themselves and how that feels. The children all have their own obviously unique identity. So it's not just Rafi from Afghanistan, but it's Rafi who identifies as Pashtun. He speaks Pashto and Urdu with extended family in Afghanistan. He's got family in Pakistan and Canada. He loves cricket, but he also loves ice hockey. So it's the intersections between different aspects of children's identities that you can get across in the environment. And then finally, Karen talked about making sure that the photographs represent everybody, but you can tell a lot from, the team photographs. You can tell a lot from what the school choir looks like, what kind of songs are the school choir singing, how do the school choir dress, does the music reflect all the cultures in the school, and also what opportunities are there for multilingual learners to take on responsibilities. Maybe early proficiency in English might make people think that there are fewer things that they can do around the school, but actually there's all sorts of responsibilities that new arrivals can take on, such as young interpreters, welcoming and guiding for new people. So that's kind of how I think the kind of general principles in terms of why all of this stuff is important.
Thanks so much, Zoe. What great insights, and what I picked up on that is, and I've been to your school, so I can feel the warmth and welcome that you provide your learners in your little school tucked away there in just behind the BRI. So I can feel the warmth and I know it. But that safe space to let them have their multiple identities reflected, and so they're safe and that they belong. Thank you so much. We've got one more question on this. You may have touched on some of this. Yes, I think you probably have. Have you got anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think I've got a few more things to add, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Please share.
So, it's important that Karen talked about you talked about the first thing that families see when they arrive at the school. That's really important. But again, also the first things that the families hear when they arrive. So we have multilingual signage around the school, and I always try to make sure that that families are able to have a guide that speaks the same language. Now, obviously, it's not always possible, but quite often I can find somebody, and if it's a child that speaks the same language as a new family, that's really fantastic. Quite often newly arrived families will say that they speak English and there isn't another language, and then they will kind of gradually change their mind as they look around the school, because when they see a display that's celebrating different languages, they see, oh, that is a good thing. They're not necessarily expecting to come to a school that has a multilingual environment. They might be expecting, English only. And so as soon as they see something that indicates that languages other than English, or hear something that indicates languages other than English are present in the school, then they start to open up about their kind of language identities and their kind of family language policies, if you like. So that's really helpful to us, because you're starting the conversation and kind of like listening and watching the children and kind of making informal assessments as soon as you meet them, really. So that's really, really helpful. I'm just going to list some things, otherwise I'll just talk and talk and talk. But some of the things that you might see and hear around the school are teachers that have learned how to say hello and thank you in children's home languages, saying it to their parents. Those kind of messages are really important. They tell a parent, I care about you. I can be bothered to learn how to say hello and thank you in your language. And even if you get it wrong and you don't pronounce it properly, the families are usually really forgiving and just really pleased that you're having a go, and that can really help forge good relationships. I think really encouraging staff that have a language other than English to communicate in their language around the children, around the families. That's again giving a really strong, powerful message. In classes, we always include children's home languages, just some keywords in their home language, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we talk about lesson observations. But some of the things that we also do in school, we celebrate International Mother Language Day, so we vertically group the children according to the language that they speak at home, or sometimes they might choose another language, or sometimes children who just have English might choose to join a language group with a friend so that they can just learn a few words of another language and just be part of a different cultural group for the day. Other things are the books, so the kind of print environment. So we have multilingual books in every class, and we have quite high mobility in our school, so I'm regularly going into classes and seeing who's in there and trying to refresh the books and redistribute them so that all of our new arrivals have got books in home languages. And we're currently starting to develop a multilingual library so that we've got some of the children's favourite authors translated into home language. It's pretty tough going. I do find it hard to find things, but we have got some Harry Potters and a few Roald Dahls that are in some different community languages, which is really great. And then another really big thing in our school is the kind of assemblies and celebrations that we have. So we will regularly celebrate different festivals, not just religious, but cultural festivals, and invite parents in. And that always goes down really brilliantly. Parents say that they feel really honoured and appreciate the fact that, you know, we've gone out of our way to find out about, say, Albanian Independence Day, or how Nowruz is celebrated in Iran, and they will come along and perhaps join in, certainly celebrate their children being involved. So and then just one other thing, I think our school, we have a designated EAL hub, which depending on the population of the school last year it was open full time, and different groups of children came to access what was going on in the hub at various different times of the day. At the moment, our community is a little bit different than it was last year, so it's just open in the afternoon. So, but having that there and a place where you can have all of the books and resources that are available, all of the artifacts, and I think having that designated space really tells families and children that, you know, we value your multilingualism. So is that enough? Does that answer what you want?
That's amazing. Thanks, Zoe. And again, what resonates with me is that linguistic safety that you provide in that school. And as you say, you know, parents, you know, had the same experience. We speak English, and you know that that's not really the case, and giving them that confidence that their language is so valued, and knowing, and what also really resonates with me is how much you know your learners, because that's a lot of knowing that you've just shared with us, to, you know, that you've reflects in what you do on a daily basis in your school. You know your learners and the nuances of the different languages and cultures. So thank you so much. I'll carry on now with lesson observations, and Zoe will be back with us shortly. Thanks so much. Okay, so we're going to look at how lesson observations now can help with this whole school evaluation process, that as part of the toolkit. And lesson observations are a very familiar occurrence in all school environments now, whether they're part of a learning walk or, as I say, a standalone classroom observation. So why are they important? Well, as we've established, school environments are now very diverse places. In addition, multilingual learners have varied needs. They face distinct challenges in accessing the curriculum in terms of their proficiency in English, or previous educational experiences. And what we know is one size does not fit all. So understanding this and what these needs are, what inclusive strategies, adaptations according to, as I said, language proficiency are being used in classrooms, in planning, is important to keep expectations high and to ensure that our multilingual learners are accessing the curriculum appropriately to reach their full potential, which of course is their right. So let's continue with a little bit of navigation on the lesson observation proformas with an EAL focus. So these proformas provide the opportunity, as I say, to observe these classroom practices through a set of questions that are presented, as you can see, in different headings from A to E, learning, lesson structures, classroom management, teaching, and learning environment was A and learning is E. Sorry, I was squinting at my screen then. So as I say, they've got a set of questions underneath, and they, allow you to really reflect more deeply on how classroom instructions, interactions, and resources are intentionally planned to ensure that there is a whole school approach to embedding consistency with these practices. So that's the hope with the lesson observations, and obviously a whole school evaluation process is that it does lead to a whole school mindset on EAL provision. A key point again to make is that there is optionality in the process again. So as Caroline mentioned earlier, for the whole school, the same resonates as with the whole school evaluation process. Not all questions need to be addressed, and the practitioner can determine the specific focus of the observation beforehand, allowing this to be very developmental, and observations can be added to the practitioners' professional continuing CPD for the future, and what's needed in training, etc. And it is suggested that 5 specific points can be selected to focus on. So it could be one from each category, for example. So that's a discussion between the observer and the teacher, and the teacher very much it's hoped that the teacher will very much be empowered in this process, because it's their observation and what they want to develop. There is space to put all that information in there, and there's, on the left-hand column here, you can see that's where you put your focus point in the chart there. And so what we would do is you'd have the question from the subcategory. It'd be in D, and it might be question 1, so that you put D1 there, so you're not having to write out the whole question there. And that question is which is a question about knowing who about your multilingual learners in the classroom. So that's what the class teacher might decide they want to focus on. There is a column here where you can add whether yes, no, or not applicable, whether it's been met or not, and obviously space for you to add more notes. So it's self-explanatory on that form there. Okay, so going back to Zoe. Welcome back, Zoe. Thinking about lesson observations.
Oh.
And that is your classroom on the wall, on the slide there.
Things aren't properly stapled up. Oh yes, my notebook display.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So here's my question: from your experience, what features make a lesson particularly supportive or inclusive for multilingual learners?
I think it's important to say, first of all, that to just remind ourselves that multilingual learners is a really, really kind of diverse umbrella. And I think that you would really be wanting to see that a teacher understands who the multilingual learners are, and that there has been and there is ongoing some kind of form of assessment, so that there are targets for individuals or groups of children based on their English, because we must always remember that we're always doing two things when we're many things, but I think the two specific things to focus on when we're teaching multilingual learners, that we're teaching the curriculum, but we're also teaching English through the curriculum. So it's really making sure that the teachers are aware of that in their lessons, and that they have planned based on their knowledge of children's English proficiency, so that newly arrived children are doing something very different to your learners that are developing competence, for example. I think that it's really a lesson that's supportive for multilingual learners will always have some aspect of a dual language. It could be that the key vocabulary is prepared in advance and translated for multilingual learners. It might be that you ask multilingual learners just to have a think about how you would say those key words in their own language. They might share them with a buddy. You might partner multilingual learners with somebody that has the same home language, or you might group them differently because you want them to have somebody that's a really good model of English, or somebody whose English is just developing, but they might be a little bit more in advance than another child, and they might be able to communicate with the child, just asking and answering them simple questions. I find that works really well. So children that have maybe been here 1 or 2 years are really good at using comprehensible English because they can remember what it's like. So I would expect to see those kinds of things in a lesson that's supportive for multilingual learners. I would expect some teaching around question words. That's really important. Quite often we ask children questions and they understand some of the vocabulary in the questions, but if you think about it, question words, why, who, where, when, they're quite abstract, aren't there? And some signage which actually, you know, kind of some visuals which helps to explain. If it's a where question, it's asking about a place. If it's a who question, it's asking about a person. That can really key children in, I think. You might also have some bilingual dictionaries or some other translation tools that children can use. You might be allowing sometimes for children to contribute to a lesson or to respond to learning using their home language, because for this lesson, the focus might be about demonstrating their knowledge of a particular history concept or a science concept, and actually they're far more able to do that using their home language. So you have to really think about the purpose of each lesson for each learner. I would also expect in a lesson, particularly with new arrivals, but not just for new arrivals, that there's lots of visuals present, that that you might have use of puppets, use of real objects, that there might be some drama, and that the tasks are adapted so that learners can make small steps of progress that then the teacher can then respond to and a dialogue can develop. And then finally, I think that a lesson that's got multilingual learners needs to be culturally relevant. So I would expect to see a curriculum that is representative of the children in front of you. So thinking about what kind of books and stories that you use and what kind of references are. So does the protagonist have to have fish and chips for his dinner, or can he have, you know, I don't know, chapati and rice or something like that? Just really thinking about what, again, this is about your environment, isn't it? Coming back to the question beforehand about what messages you're giving to children about kind of what's acceptable or accepted in their school, and saying, you know, you belong here.
That's great, thank you. And again, what's really resonating for me there is goes beyond the knowing the languages your children speak in the class and what their culture is. It's what their prior knowledge is as well, and you know, making sure as a class teacher you know that, so that you can prepare appropriately as well. Yeah, amazing. We've got one more little question here, which I think maybe you might have touched on some of this already, but if you've got anything to add to what you've said through that question, how can structured lesson observations focus on EAL help raise school awareness and improve teaching practices across all subjects?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we all need to do more in schools is actually watch each other teach, because you can always learn the way that they go on, however experienced or inexperienced you are as a teacher. So I think lesson observations, whether they are a formal observation or whether they're a learning walk, can really open up. It's so much easier to learn a new way of doing something by seeing somebody do it than it is to kind of read about it. It just makes such a difference. But I think other important things about lesson observations in terms of raising school awareness and improving practice are making sure that, you know, it's accountability really, and making sure that teachers are complying, and that if you've got agreed procedures in place, that they are happening, and that if there aren't, what are the barriers, and kind of trying to break down those barriers. I think that you might just have lesson observations where you're looking for some particular thing. So it's really easy to always be focusing on the new arrivals, and again, forgetting about those children that are proficient and their English is competent, but actually the lack of nuanced vocabulary might be the reason why they're not doing so well in their comprehension papers further up the school, or why their writing is sometimes just a little bit kind of bland and needs something more in there. So it can give you all that sort of information. It's a really good way of collecting data. It's a really good way of moderating, you know, how your teachers across the school are assessing pupils, and thinking about, you know, well, if that teacher thinks these children at this level and that one thinks something else, then maybe what can we do to kind of share our practice a bit more and make sure that we're kind of you know, using the same guidelines, and we've got the same idea about what a child at, say, strand B is compared to what a child at strand A. But I think another really, really important thing is to celebrate good practice, because, you know, this stuff is hard, and the EAL has been hidden away, and it's great now that Ofsted are talking about it. But I think you know, really celebrating what people are doing in their classrooms with their multilingual learners is another really, really important aspect of observing teachers teaching and children learning.
Oh, Amay, well, thank you so much, Zoe, for all those valuable insights and your experience and your expertise in this field. So Zoe's going to stay around for a little bit longer while we finish the webinar, and hopefully if there's any questions that she needs to address, she will. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Zoe. For time now, I'm going to zip along to the next lot of proformas. Okay, so we're now going to think about pupil voice. Again, a common activity in schools, and probably something you may already be using. So it's meant to be it's meant to meaningfully involve pupils, in this case multilingual learners, in decisions that affect their education, the school environment, and their overall learning. It involves listening to, valuing, and acting on students' opinions and ideas to help shape their teaching practices, school policies, and wider school culture. Because multilingual learners often face distinct challenges, including learning an additional language and adjusting to a new culture. Actively listening to their voices provides you with valuable and first-hand insight into this experience, which hopefully will help you to develop more effective and responsive provision. Okay, so the proformas for pupil voice. So we've got two. There's one for primary and there's one for secondary. Both versions guide you with suggested questions that you can give directly to multilingual learners, particularly learners, you know, older learners, so that they can take them away, think about their responses before you hold a focus group or meeting with such learners. So the pupils can, as they use these to make notes, and whatever language they prefer. You could also translate these into the learner's home language if needed, using a translation tool. So of course you can use the prompts provided on the form, or you may choose to add and adapt your own. So the suggested questions are divided up into the following categories. So we've got questions about your first days, we've got questions about learning English, questions about how well you understand your lessons, questions about friends and friendships, and some last thoughts. And both primary and secondary follow this format. So, as I said, Zakir wasn't able to be with us today, but we posed these two questions to him, and I shall go through his responses on the next slide. So we asked Zakir, in your school, what strategies or approaches have you found effective in creating opportunities for multilingual learners, multilingual pupils to share their experience and feel heard? And we also asked him, how has listening to pupils' experiences helped or informed your provision for them? So this is what Zakir said. So he talked about pupil, in the first speech bubble there, regular opportunities for discussion through talk partners and groups. And he talked about the insight, how these insights and opinions can be sought through the careful groupings, partner talk, particularly if home language pairs and groupings are used, so that you can get much more deeper insights and opinion from young learners or and young people. He also talked about how the same could be said from conducting surveys, and you could use the question in some of the questions in the proforma if appropriate, or obviously have your own depending on the subject of the survey is, and you can adapt it accordingly. He talked about how sharing stories and traditions or phrases from their home language, and Zoe's drawn on that a little bit earlier on, really helps pupils to feel safe, that they can communicate in their home language, and demonstrates the value that you have in the pupil's home language, their culture, and their literacy experiences, and that develops their confidence and sense of belonging. He also talked about how if you're in an atmosphere where your cultural identity is valued, again, that brings about confidence, it brings about and impacts on motivation and school life. It has a benefit for everybody, because people are valued and identity grow. They grow within that value and are motivated. He talked about using bilingual staff. Again, it allows for gives agency for those learners who may want to say something, but they maybe not quite as confident that what they're saying, people will understand them, or they just don't know how to structure it. So having someone that can help them with their voice to express themselves is really important. Again, and adds to that sense of belonging. And how again, sharing work and achievements of multilingual learners through assemblies or displays, again, adds to their confidence and their motivation, and also kind of really showcases their resilience in their progress in learning from their own sort of unique and individual starting points. As Zoe has said, it's tough for the teachers, it's pretty tough for these children as well. So celebrating that is really important. So what Zakir's contributions really demonstrate is there are a wide range of ways that schools can encourage and listen to pupil voice, provide that agency, visibility to their voices and to their opinions. Of course, some of these are more formal than others, but we hope that this pupil voice proforma tool will support you in developing this. And all of these activities are important and valuable for the whole school evaluation. And flipping back to what Caroline was saying around the Ofsted inspection as well. So hopefully it really helped you to demonstrate your efforts in this area. Okay, and finally, we'll look at pupil pursuit now, which is also known as shadowing a pupil. And this is an activity that involves a teacher or another staff member following a multilingual learner through part or all of their school day to gain that deeper understanding of their academic, social and emotional experiences in school. So think of it as a day in the life of approach that offers a real-time qualitative insights into multilingual learners' experience in different aspects of school. So teachers, school leaders or TAs can observe a pupil for a variety of purposes and at different levels of depth. And it's a particularly useful activity for trainee teachers as well, especially if this is in their second placement and they're in a which is more linguistically diverse than their first one. So it's a useful activity for all sorts of reasons. So pupil pursuit is not an evaluative activity of either the pupil or the teacher, but an exercise that can help equip educators with a perspective and information needed to hopefully improve instruction, increase inclusion, and drive meaningful change in the process. So I'll go through the proformas now, but they're proformas as A, B, and C in this tool allow for this observers to track this data depending upon the purpose of the observation. So I will be going through those now. So the first proforma document is proforma A, and that's which provides opportunities to observe multilingual learners' academic development. So that's on page 1, where there's an area for you to put information in about the learner, about yourself, and there's instructions there as well, some brief instructions on how to access and go about the activity. Page 2 is divided into 4 language domains, as you can see there, that reflect, in fact, our EAL assessment framework: listening, speaking, reading and viewing, and writing. And there's a column for you to do your observations in time intervals. So it says there, minute 1 to 5. And there's a column then for you to record the codes. So you've got some little codes at the bottom there. For example, you can see there's teacher listening to the teacher, or HL using home language. So you know, without going through all those codes just now, really make yourself familiar with those. And you put those codes into those intervals as you do your observation. There's a box on page 3 in the document, which I haven't put up here on the slide because it's just a blank box, where you can add extra comments in. In due course, for this proforma, there'll be a sample available as an example of using the codes and how to format it in the document. So that's proforma A. Then we have the second, which is proforma B, which is sort of a similar concept, which provides opportunities to observe spoken or oral language development. And as I said, the initial format of this proforma is the same, with space to put information in and brief instructions for you to follow. We have a table 1, which is titled Language Use Chart. And this is designed to enable you to observe in time intervals and keep a tally. As you can see there's some in there. To keep a tally of the spoken language used for different contexts as well. And there's the context you've got: speaking to students or speaking to the teacher. And then on the right hand column, that there's a space there for you to record the type of language used. So, and if the language used is in English or in home language. Again, we've got the final column is an area where if there's any missed opportunities to record any observation of language use. And then we have an additional table 2, which is for additional notes and comments of observed activities. Again, there's time intervals there. You've got a column there for context code, and your codes are here at the bottom and just underneath the title there for you to insert into the column. And again, space for you to add your own comment. The sample, again, sample B, will be on the website soon as well for a model of that. And finally, we've got proforma C, which comes in C1 and C2. So C1 is about classroom observations, so that it's a focus on general observation, and there's one for in the classroom and there's one for observations outside the classroom. So we just look at C1 for a moment. Again, you've got space for information there and some instructions again, but the proforma is in different categories with questions underneath to guide you in your observation in the classroom. And then the second one, proforma C2, allows on that general school experience outside the classroom, following the same format. You've got space to put all your information and instructions, and again, and the categories follow the same more or less the same headings. There's a couple that are slightly different. But for example, there's a subheading on behaviours, and it asks what observable behaviour indicate the pupil's sense of well-being within the school environment. So just make yourself familiar with the questions that guide you. Now, again, we asked Sakia a question. This question, over the years, what insights have you gained from observing multilingual learners' daily experiences, and how this informed your practice? And he answered us by saying that it provided insight into how learners understood the school day. You could observe when there were challenges or not throughout the day, and what you could do to address them. You identified when the pupils may be feeling isolated or unsure of routines, and so that you could think about how you could address that. Do other learners feel the same? He talked about observing when pupils show, resilience and independence in communicating independently, to ask for what they need when they're out and about in school. So all the red ones are kind of out of the classroom, and then the green speech bubbles coming up now are thinking about in the classroom. So pupil pursuit could help you to notice when things are working, what scaffolds are working and what's not working, and using observations to inform teaching strategies, to build on good practice in the school by completing the observations. Again, it just demonstrates how and insights into a pupil's day, how they are managing the challenges they face in school, and what you can consider to do to address these challenges as a whole school, so that those multilingual learners feel valued. So I'm going to stop now because I'm very...
Thank you so much, Karen and Zoe. That was a really fabulous presentation, really useful insights from Zoe. I'm very mindful of time. Thank you for your patience as we've gone through this. There were 2 questions that came up in the chat, but because of time, I'm not going to go through those now, but I will email you with some ideas. And I imagine that Karen will have some suggestions as well. So if we can just go on to the last couple of slides, Karen, thank you. So just reminding everybody that we recognise some schools would prefer to have somebody with expertise support them through a full evaluation process. And we've mentioned before, we've seen a significant increase in schools contacting us about this. As you probably know, we have a team of over 100 practitioners, Zoe is one of those, who are trained and licensed to run our training in their area. And the majority of them also are trained to run a whole school evaluation. So if you take a look at the map on the regional training page of the website, so Karen's sharing the website page now, you'll be able to see the closest providers to you. So I'm flagging up Yorkshire and Humberside at the moment. And you can reach out to them directly. And similarly, so if you keep clicking, Karen, similarly, if you're interested in receiving training, perhaps as an action following on from a whole school evaluation, those licensed partners can either go into schools to run training for groups, and many of them also run open access courses. And you can see on the website, if you click again, Karen, some of them are, well, there's a lot of them listed already for the next academic year. So that top row is training opportunities that are in the Yorkshire and Humberside area. And they only show 4 at a time. So there's even more on the website if you take a look closely. Yes, there's lots in London as well. There's a partner, there's 2 centres of expertise in London. There's one with St Bernadette's and one with Harris Institute. So if you take a look, and there are other people who work in London as well. So if you do take a look, you'll be able to see those. And then underneath where it says similar courses, it just throws up courses that other regional providers are running. And sometimes when they're online, they're not so worried about it being a local participant. You might be able to join other training opportunities. So just letting you know about that. And then also linked to the evaluation, I just wanted to mention that the Bell Foundation offers EAL accreditation schemes for both UK and international schools, and they're designed to provide a recognised and trusted stamp of excellence in EAL provision. And it might be something that your school is interested in, potentially after completing a whole school evaluation. You can see that quote there from a school that has been through the process. And finally, just to let you know that we've got a webinar next week that's looking at some research that's been launched from Oxford University around learners in English schools, particularly looking at proficiency in English. And that webinar, I believe, has got over 800 people signed up already. So we know there's huge interest in that webinar. So it's a panel event with a range of practitioners. So I really recommend signing up to that one. And then finally, we've got a course coming up in January on supporting new arrivals. And that's one of our courses. So tutor-led course in January, and the link is there if you're interested in signing up for that course. So it's 5:10. Thank you very much for joining us. Zoe, a huge thank you. We really do appreciate all of the support that we receive from our licensed practitioners and the insights that you're able to share. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, it will be. The link will be shared tomorrow. I've just seen the question come in.